So if you're fishing the Delta, you've probably heard more than once the successful anglers talk about finding moving water. If you find moving water, you'll find the fish and you're going to be successful. If you're a weekend angler or someone that doesn't get to fish the Delta a whole lot, you're probably thinking, you know, I fish the Delta and every day I'm out here, the water's moving. The tide comes in, comes out 365 days a year. I'm always fishing moving water and I'm not catching fish. Well, the trick is to find the productive moving water. Once you find the productive moving water, you're going to be much more consistent when it comes to catching fish. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How to find the most productive moving water. We're going to get into the video right now. I may be jumping around a little bit today, but I guarantee you this video is going to be packed with information that you can use on your very next trip to start getting into that moving water that produces fish. Let's get into the video. Let's get started and we'll talk about this cut right here. And this is a cut that's in a, was created from years and years of erosion through tides, wind, so on and so forth. And this thule bank or thule island that is in the middle of a slough here basically has cuts all over it, and it's just through time and erosion. Some of the cuts may be 4 feet wide, some of them may be 20 or 30 feet wide. What I want to get at before we start going around and looking at different cuts and talking about how to fish them is when we approach these, we have to think of what happens in these cuts. A cut like this, out in the middle, straight through here, there's going to be a channel. That's where you're going to get the fastest moving water. You'll see edges on that channel or seams where the moving water is coming right down the middle of the channel. You'll have a seam on each side of that which the water moves slower. That's due to a point on each side of this cut. So when you look at these cuts, you have to think there are many places where the fish can hold. They're going to hold in different spots at different times of the tide, on different days and different seasons. But what we want to look at is the point on each side. We want to look at the channel. We want to look at the seams of the channel. Faster moving water in the middle, slower on the sides, eddies created by these points that create softer water in behind them. Generally, we're going to find an area that on one side there will be a flat that grows more vegetation than on the other side, depending on how the tide cuts these things. So one side there'll be a flat, one side there'll be a deeper belly. That's important to know because when you come up to any various cut, you need to figure out how you want to approach it. Do I think the fish are going to be up maybe on the other side of that, on the flat in maybe 2 or 3 feet of water? Or are they going to be on this side of it, down in the belly, holding down here, waiting for the tide to maybe bring them some type of food? So we'll keep this in mind. I'm going to go around to several of little openings, and we're going to talk about the baits that we use, how we fish them, and hopefully you guys are going to get a lot of information where you can go out and start catching fish in these cuts. So before we take off and we start looking at individual cuts and talk about how to fish them, the baits and the approaches and things, I just want to say that as a general rule, all of these cuts will hold both stripers and largemouth bass. If you find the bigger cuts like out around Frank's Track or Mildred Island, they have a lot more water flow going through them. Those are probably going to be the primary places you want to start looking for stripers. If you're primarily looking for largemouth bass, I would suggest starting your cut fishing looking in the sloughs that have thule islands that have smaller cuts in them. Those are going to hold more largemouth bass. If you know where these cuts are, you'll always have some magnets that you can go to, that there will always be some fish there. And I just want to say, every cut doesn't produce fish every day, but if you've got a dozen of these things and you're able to move around, you know, on a daily basis and fish through these cuts, you're going to be more successful, and I guarantee you're going to be a lot more efficient out here on the Delta. You won't be wasting your time, because as you will see when we come in here, when we're fishing these things, there's a very efficient way to fish them, and pick them apart. You pick them apart, you either catch fish or you don't, you move on to the next one. So let's go start looking at some of these cuts. Okay, I've just pulled up probably about 100 yards from where we did the intro, and that Thule island that I was talking about, this is the point behind me. One thing that I will always do, if I am fishing a Thule island that may be 100 yards long and there is maybe 3 or 4 cuts in them, I'll go through all of those cuts. But I will always make sure when I get to the point, I'm going to fish the point. Because as you can see, let me move over here, there's several cuts in this Thule point. Now where this hyacinth is here, when the tide comes in, that hyacinth is going to push through there, and there's going to be a channel coming through each one of these little cuts. Now how are we going to approach this? Remember, there are so many places that the fish can be holding. We've got to be careful on how we approach it. If I'm fishing this during the summer months, I'm going to pull up way off of this point, or I might pull up right where I'm at right now, and I want to throw a topwater right across that point. Could be a buzz bait, it could be a popper, it could be a walking bait, but I want to make a cast or two right across that point to see if I can catch an aggressive fish that may be holding there. Off of that point, I guarantee you, if the tide is moving this way, there's going to be a shield where the fish can sit behind those Thules and come out and attack from the point. There's also going to be some deep water off of that point wherever the drop off is, and where that deep water is, that can be another ambush zone. So it can be right at the Thule point, it can be out 5 or 6 feet. That's the first place I'd fish. The next thing I'm going to think about is coming in and maybe throwing a chatterbait or something that I can fish right along the edges and pick off those easy fish. Now, as I get in to the cuts in here, that's probably where I'm going to pick up a wacky worm, weightless, and just flip it in and have it run right through those cuts very naturally. See if I can pick something up as the tide is pulling bait through there. Last but not least, if there is hyacinth like we have here or floating vegetation, I'll pull out a punch rod and I'll fish each one of these little vegetation mats. So remember, there's always going to be several areas that hold fish here. Fish will not always be in the current. They may be in the seam, they may be pulled in tight behind one of these Thule islands, just nosing into the current, waiting for bait to come by. So although we're not catching them directly in the current is responsible for where those fish are positioning and how we're going to fish it. Okay, we've just pulled up to another cut. This is a little cut. It's probably about 6 or 8 feet wide, and it's a natural cut that has come through basically a Thule island. And you can see now that we have a little bit of current going or tide going, you can see where it's cutting right through the middle of that, and where that wind is blowing through there, that's exactly where the deep part of that cut will be, or the channel. So when you're coming up to this, that would be a great place to throw a drop shot or a T-rig worm, something like that. You can also throw topwaters through there. But when you approach this, remember, as that cuts through here, it's probably going to form a belly right out somewhere, right in front of the boat. So you don't want to pull right up to this. You want to probably start fishing this from 70 or 80 feet back, maybe throwing a jerkbait out here in the middle, maybe a topwater, could be a crankbait, a lipless, anything like that, chatterbaits. Fish this area, work your way up, definitely hit that cut with some plastic worms. Like I said, probably a drop shot, maybe that's a good place for a robo worm, maybe a 5 or 6 inch Cinco unweighted, right up in there. You can also punch around the edges of this thing. And this has everything that you need to catch bass in it. You've got 2 points. Those points are cutting a break in the current. So a lot of the big bass may be just off to the edge on each side of this point, looking in to see what that current is bringing down as far as crayfish, bluegill swimming around there, any type of bait fish that may be getting pushed through there. plenty of ambush points out here. You can fish this whole little area in maybe 5 or 10 minutes. If you don't get anything, you pull out, you go to the next one. So let's go to the next one and see what we got. Okay, we're coming up to another cut, and I'm actually going to fish this a little bit. And I'm going to tell you why after I fish it. I'm going to fish it real quick. We'll see if I can pull something out. Then we'll pull out here and we'll talk about why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I came in here to because I know this cut is here, and usually this hyacinth isn't here. So it's usually just all a nice clean cut through here where there's about I'll say a 6-foot channel down the edges. And if you look at this, it would come out like this and drop down into a channel. So we have everything that a good cut needs. The other side of it, if you see these tules, small little tule patch up about 30 feet from where the hyacinth ends, that's very shallow up there. It's maybe, I'll say, between 1 and 5 feet deep, depending on the tide. We've got some points out here. We've got behind the camera, and we'll turn around maybe and get this. The deep trough is behind where we are right now. So remember, we talked about a flat being on one side, a trough being on the other. The reason for that is how this little island here drains. The incoming tide on this doesn't have a lot of push or cutting power to come through here and channelize the inside of this flooded island. As that island floods and the tide starts moving out, the tide is much stronger in this cut. So as it comes through and it pushes down here, there's a trough right behind the boat where we're standing. That's the deep water. So start thinking about when you come into these places, take your boat and move around as much as you can and look and see where the flat side is and the deep side of these cuts. I came in here today thinking that it was going to be a cut, but when I saw this, I said I better throw a few punch casts, because I know right up here, that's where the edge is. There's a lip there, there's a lip on the other side, and it's going down into the deeper water. Now there's no current going right now, so I thought if I came in and I was able to throw a couple punch casts there, those are the primary targets where fish would be right now. And getting back to what we talked about in the beginning of the video, it's how to be efficient in places like this. So if you were out here on a Saturday or Sunday, you've got 8 hours to fish, and you said, I know this little place, you're expecting it to be clear of hyacinth. You come in, you turn around the corner, it's all choked up. If you know the area and you fished it before, be thinking, hey, I can still fish this. I'm going to come up and I'm going to fish this area, and this area, maybe punch out here, and then I'll get the heck out of here. Learning these areas that have these cuts, they don't always have to have water going through them. We know that when the water is moving and it's creating all the little eddies and current, and the bait fish are getting caught in it, there's going to be fish right here. When that's not happening, or when we've got vegetation growing over it, these fish don't go a long way. They'll be around here somewhere, and if there is cover, bait, and depth, there's going to be fish still in here. what I have in front of me is the big break here at Mildred Island. This is one of the levee breaks that caused the flooded island. These larger breaks are the breaks that we're talking about that are primarily better for striper fishing. Let me move this around a little bit here. You can see the full break out here. That's a big break. So out towards the middle, that's where you want to fish for your stripers. So if you're fishing for largemouth bass, you want to always look at the points on these breaks. And we're going to go around this point here. You can see the tide is just starting to move towards us. And when that tide really starts to move, there's going to be a lot of moving water in here. Now the largemouth bass may not be sitting out in the biggest part of the current, but they'll be tucked right into a seam that's in here, or they'll be back into this area in here over in these thules. Now in here is a great place to punch, to throw worms, slower moving baits, drop shots. You can throw topwater buzz baits over the point. What you want to do is fish probably 50 feet into this and then come around, fish this area, move around the point, and maybe fish 50 feet into the other side of the point. This is where most of the largemouth bass are going to be. All this area in here would be great to punch, great to flip, drop shot, chatterbaits, pretty much all of the normal suspects. And you can also see there's going to be moving water hitting this bank here, bringing bait into the bank. That's why we want to, if we're fishing for largemouth bass, we want to move down the bank maybe 50, 100 feet to see if the fish may be positioned a little bit inside of where the moving water is. We're going to pull up just a little bit and we can see where this is not going to be a break, but in a few years this is going to be a cut. The current will cut through here, and this is going to create another one of these channels, a brand new channel that may be, you know, good in the next couple years. It may be good 10 years down the road. But as you can see here, it's already starting to cut through this kind of peninsula, and it will create a channel. So I would be fishing right in here too, because we got a lot of wind action and we still have water movement that's pushing into this bank, and it's pushing bait in here. We're going to go down around the corner, and there's another cool little cut in here, and we want to talk about that because it's a whole different type of cut rather than this great big huge cut. So let's go check that out. Okay, so I want to talk about another little break here in Mildred Island. This is not a break, it's more of a cut that was formed after the island was flooded. But because it's so narrow, when you have a big tide, the water really cuts through here. And I just wanted to say that a lot of times in these cuts, the primary area is not right in the cut. It could be 100 yards inside, 100 yards outside, because that water that's really moving, stripers may like to be in there from time to time. The largemouth bass, again, are going to be around the points, but the primary area could be, say, 50 yards inside that cut where the water starts. It's still moving, but it's slowing down. This is where everything kind of comes together as far as the bait. There will be a channel out here, let's say 50 yards in here. You're going to start to see this elodea and things start to grow out here, this submerged vegetation. So you'll have a clean bottom. Look for the area, transition area, where you have a cleaner, deeper bottom to where it transitions into where the submerged vegetation is growing, and you want to fish around that edge. That's where a lot of the largemouth bass will be. So think about that when you come up to some of these cuts where the water is really moving through there. You don't want to fish right in the middle of the cut, but somewhere around that, somewhere around the edge where you start to see the vegetation and that transitional area, that's where you want to fish. Let's go check out another cut. Okay, we've pulled up to this point, and you can see where the wind and tide has made a couple little channel cuts through this point. 10 years ago, this point probably would have been full of thules, but now we've got one little channel here, one little channel here, and there's also a channel on the outside. So if you were going to fish this, you'd want to fish this area through that cut. You'd want to fish through the middle cut. And again, you can throw top waters, you can throw chatterbaits. It's a little bit shallow out there. It'd be probably difficult to throw a crankbait unless it's a very shallow diving crankbait. It would be difficult to throw jerk baits, maybe a jerk bait out here or a topwater. But you want to fish all three of those areas. You never know where the fish are going to be. Let's go see if we can find another cut somewhere out here and get this thing wrapped up. All right, I'm just about tired of talking about cuts, so it's time for me to cut out. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe. Until the next video, I'll see you guys on the water.